101 series to try to help anybody that might need help starting making it to orbit around Kerbin, or landing on the moon, making it to one of the moons around Jewel. But we'll take it one step at a time, and here we are starting a new career, and that's how we'll start. First things first, I'm going to be getting rid of one of these files so I can start this. I guess it'll be this one right here. Alright, so now that we have room, let's go on ahead and start the game. Now, for starters, you'll have to name your file. I'm going to name this KSP 101 to go along with the series. And we're going to be playing career mode. Just to explain career mode, you'll have to be dealing with such things as funding, your administration's reputation, as well as collecting science. That way you can progress through the tech tree, unlock more parts, and make it further. You can do this in science mode, but you won't have the funding to worry about, you won't have reputation to worry about, and you also won't have any contracts. And contracts you will only be able to get in career mode, which is why personally I think it's the funnest. Sandbox, of course, anything goes. You don't have to worry about unlocking anything or accruing any money or dealing with any reputation, success or failures. But you also won't have contracts in Sandbox either. So contracts are exclusive to career mode, which is why we're going to be doing career mode. Which, if you can play career mode, you can play Sandbox and Science just as easily. It's idealistically the best mode to play, like the most challenging and most fulfilling. And for now, we're going to stick to using the basic Kerbal flag and playing on normal. And once we have all that ready to go, we will go ahead and start. Now, this initial episode is going to be dealing with such things as launching your first vessel, collecting enough science to be able to build a vessel that's capable of making it to orbit, and we might even be able to fit in a Mun flyby, though I may save stuff like that for a dedicated Mun video, which might come directly after this episode. But for now, let's go ahead and take our $25,000 and see what we can do with it. Now, to start out, we want to go to mission control. However, first, check out all the different prices required to upgrade these facilities. They are very important, but we will get to those as they come. But for now, the first thing we'll do is go into the mission control center and gather up our first 2 contracts, because right now, most max active contracts allowed for us to have are 2 at the most, which after we upgrade we'll be able to do more than 2, but for the most part 2 is really all we'll be needing to do for a good while at the most. So first we'll gather science data and we'll launch our first vessel. Then we'll focus on escaping the atmosphere and making orbit around Kerbin. So for now, that garnered us maybe $3,360 more to help us build this first vessel, which we are very limited on, but that will change soon as we progress through these contracts and get more science. Now, I am playing with the most recent update, the Breaking Ground DLC, as well as the Making History DLC. If you do not have those, you will probably see some parts that you don't have and will likely have to find alternatives to. But I highly recommend making sure that you update first and get those DLCs to be able to play along and get the most out of this. In the beginning, we only have 2 pods to choose from, 1 engine, 1 structural girder, some aerodynamic basic fins, the mystery goo for the science, and a parachute. But before we even launch our first vessel, what we want to do is try to collect some science from all the pads that we can use to get more parts. So first we will attach a mystery goo and then choose a launch site by opening the pause menu and going to choose launch site, and we'll do the desert first. This is a very easy way to score some quick and easy science at the beginning, which I highly recommend doing so you can progress further faster. So as soon as this loads up, which shouldn't take long since it's a very small 2-part vessel, we will get underway. Alright, so here we are, and we will go on ahead and select our mystery goo containment unit, observe it, collect our 3 science, which, something else to point out, as you can see, you can transmit this with antenna, which we don't have yet, but we'll get to, but you will lose quite a bit of science if you do that, so it's much more preferable to keep the science and return it with you on your missions. So we'll keep that. Then we will get a crew report from our pod, which is also another great way to get science in various situations. And then after that, let's go on ahead and EVA and select our Kerbal and get an EVA report. And right now we can only EVA on land on Kerbin, but that'll change as well. Now, there's another way to get more science this way too. For now, we will store the data from our EVA into the pod and then leave it behind. And then run over here, climb this, and then grab it. Well, try to grab it. Once we hit dirt, we'll do another EVA report to get an EVA report from the desert for more science. And then we will recover our Kerbal. After we recover our Kerbal, we're going to have to go into what's called the tracking station to recover the pod that's on the launch pad for the science that was put into that pod. As soon as this loads up, we'll see the science from the EVA report, and that'll knock out one of the contracts. So now we have 15 science from the 7.4 that we just earned, and no reputation change, but we also scored some science from completing the contract as well, and get a little we got a little bit more money from those too. And of course our world first milestones, somehow breaking to some land distance records and altitude records, but anyways, let's go on ahead and knock that out. Go to our tracking station. In the tracking station you can see all the vessels that you have out, or Kerbals, or asteroids, bases, flags, various other things up here that you can toggle on and off, which you can see happening when I toggle the sights on and off. Right now we have this craft at this site. We'll hit square to recover it and get the science from that. Now we'll leave the tracking station. Let's go on ahead and do that again, except at the other launch pads, but before we do that, let's go to our research and development facility and spend some of this science to get more science. And we can also go ahead and get some more engines and fuel tanks. That also comes with antennas. And now we only have enough to, well, don't even have enough to get those yet, so now we must do more science. Let's go back to our VAB. We're pretty much going to do the same thing, we're just going to put more science on it now. Also, since the return price is kind of degrading, we'll get rid of the monopropellant since we won't need it at all, and then go ahead and apply the new science. stick it on this side, I suppose. Okay. And then we will go to the boomerang launch site. After this, we should have enough to launch our first vessel and make it a nice vessel. We may even shoot to escape the atmosphere, depending on what kind of tech we get with the science we're about to get. If not, we can go to the normal launch pad and do a normal first launch, but we'll see. So much like last time, let's take our mystery goo, and then we'll get our crew report. And now this time we have a thermometer, so we can log the temperature, take that science, EVA, get our EVA report, and then we'll stuff that EVA report in here, let go of the craft, run over here and try to grab this and go down there. Nice. Okay. And we'll let go once we're close. Run over here. And EVA report again. Now, the reason why I'm recovering them separately, if you try to climb back up this and make it back onto the pad, it won't work out too well, as you will do that. Even if you try to climb out. Oh, hey, we made it. Okay, well that makes it easier. Alright, so let's grab it, climb up a little bit, and get back in. Now, we'll just recover them both without having to go to the tracking facility, or the tracking station. So now we should have a decent amount of tech after we spend the science that we just got to be able to launch a nice, decent first vehicle. But let's see what we got. 23 science, okay. We got a little bit more money too, but let's check our contracts out. Get that escape the atmosphere contract, and we can't get any more now, so we'll move on to research and development. Now, we have fuel tanks. We have a nice liquid fuel engine, but we could use more science. Plus, we're going to need some drogue chutes and a heat shield if we want to escape the atmosphere and make it back home. So we'll take that, and that's all we can get. Now we'll make a quick save and move along. And for now, all we can do are 30 parts on our vessels with a total size of 18 tons and 20 meters in height. Now we could upgrade those, but it'll cost too much money here, and it's not entirely necessary for the launch pad yet, so we'll just keep our money. However, the astronaut complex, if you upgrade it, you can EVA while you're in the air, in space, or moons. But we're not really doing that just yet either, so something else to keep in mind for here soon. But for now, let's go back to the VAB and make our first rocket. And we can only make it up to 30 parts, so we have to be very picky about how we're going to do this with what we have. But we are going to attempt to escape the atmosphere with this vessel. Let's remove the mystery goo and remove this thermometer. And I like to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing, but it's all down to personal preference. So let's stick a heat shield on the bottom of this pod. That way it doesn't burn up upon re-entry. And you're going to need a decoupler under that. You can stick it directly on it, or you can add a fairing. Either way works. Personally, I don't like the gap, so I'm going to stick it there. Now, we need science. We'll stick the thermometer. Well, no, let's do the mystery goo first. And a lot of people say to stick it up higher, but I like to stick it lower. That way it can protect other parts from being burnt up. Because if you have, say, this barometer down here, it can burn up. But these don't burn up so easily. And now we'll switch to radial mode and select radial 2, that way we have 2 to use. And then we'll swap back to radial 1 after moving this sideways for more room for the drogue chutes, and swap it back to radial 1. And do the same for the barometer, placing it over here. And now we still have room for our drogue chutes, which I don't want to place sideways, but I suppose we'll have to. There is a way around this though that I will show you. You select move, select your goo, and then move them inward like such. Then you can move these down a slot, and you can still use both and have more room for your drogue chutes. Which we will now adjust, like so. As long as it doesn't get in the way of the barometer. Okay, good. Then we'll top it off with our parachute, back to radial 1. Now we have our pod. Now, with that, it's time to attach the communitron, which you can really stick anywhere, but I prefer to stick here. It just looks better. However, it is not even necessary to have one. And I also like to move mine down just a little bit, and it'll still work fine. Now we can move on to the rocket itself. We already have our decoupler, now we just need to attach the tanks. I'm going to make this a 2-stage vessel, provided I have enough room. Well, to make more room, I'll go ahead and get rid of this. So there's one tank. Now you can hold square, or I suppose it would be X, I believe, on the Xbox. You can hold X or square and then hit A or X on the PS4 to copy it, like so. And that's going to be my second stage with the swivel engine. I'm going to put a decoupler under it. I'm pretty much going to copy that, like so, for this stage. And we're still only at 9 tons. And because of that, this swivel can push 167.9 tons in atmosphere. Or 16.79 tons. You just have to move the decimal over 1 spot to the left, and that will tell you pretty much how much tonnage it can move. But you want it to be at least 10-20% less. So the ASL, or atmospheric thrust, for this engine is 167. Move the decimal over 16.7. You'd want your top mass to be topped out at no more than about 15 tons, preferably 14, for best results. Anyways, we have 2 stages now, and we have this hammer solid fuel booster, which won't let you gimbal, which is moving the vessel so easily, but it won't really much matter because we're just using it as an initial lift stage. So we'll attach it here. Now we're at 12.6 tons, still plenty of thrust to be able to move that. And we'll just keep it there now that we're at 23 parts. For now, we need to attach some basic fins. So turn on your center of mass overlay, center of thrust overlay, and your aerodynamic overlay. And you want the aerodynamic marker to be in between your center of mass and center of thrust. And for everything to be nice and even, you can do 3, 4, or more, but it's preferable to do at least 3, because 2 will only provide 2 planes for the aerodynamic effect, I suppose you would call it, which isn't enough control, to be honest. It is good for planes, but not for rockets. So we'll put at least 3 to conserve part count. And we still have a nice center of aerodynamic force, or control, in between the center of mass and thrust. That is for now, because we can still put 4 more parts on this thing, which we are going to do by placing more tanks on the second stage and seeing just how much that affects the second stage mass. It'll still move, so let's put 2 more on and top out our part count. It might be a little floppy, but we'll see how it goes. And now we're at 14.9 tons. This will move 19.7, so it's fine. Now we have to check our staging. It's very important. First stage, we want this to go off. Second stage, we want that to decouple and activate the second stage engine. And then the third stage, same thing. And then for our final stages, we have to kick the pod away from the rocket. And then we'll want our drogue chutes to deploy. And after the drogue chutes, we can deploy our main parachute. The drogue chute slowing us down at higher altitudes, the main parachute for landing. And we have a nice solid vessel to start with. So let's name it. We will name this the R1 for Rocket 1. And save it. Make sure... Okay, good. Now that we have that, let's try to move this down a little bit to where it's barely popping up off the floor. That way when it loads it on the launch pad, it'll be nice and stable. Just double check all of our options. That's really all that we're going to be using, so let's launch. And this time we are going to be launching with Valentina. And we're going to change her outfit to the Breaking Ground suit. Same for the rest. This allows us to change the color of their suit once we turn their lights on. We'll check that out once we get on the launch pad and grab our initial science. Okay, so now we have our vessel on the launch pad. We want to grab some science from the launch pad since we have yet to do that. So let's go on ahead and grab our temperature. And use one of our mystery goos for the launch pad. Get our barometric reading. And then our crew report. And now here's the tricky part about the barometer and the thermometer. When you go EVA, and right now we can only EVA on land, we can grab the science from those and use them again once we launch. But we can only use them one more time unless we transmit the data. For now, we'll collect all this data and get our EVA report. And I'm going to turn her light on and adjust the color of her suit. I use red for pilots, but that's just my preference. Now that we have all that, we will get back in our rocket and prepare to launch. We will turn SAS on by hitting circle or on the Xbox B, so we can control the vessel a little bit more stably. And we'll punch it up to full throttle, which won't matter with the solid booster, but once we kick the solid booster, it's gonna matter with the swivel engine, which you will see. Okay, but for now, let's launch by hitting X or A on the controller. immediately we could start grabbing science, but I'm going to wait because I want science from a higher altitude. Right now, we are showing flying over Kerbin Shores. Now we're about to lose this stage, so let's stage it the same way that we launched. And as you can see, we have control of the vehicle now with the swivel, which we can throttle up and down, and thanks to its gimbal, we can now turn the vessel. And we're doing a very simple launch. We're gonna want to try to hit this 80 mark at about 250 meters per second. Once we hit that, slowly work our way over to 90 degrees by at least 500 meters per second to 1000. Very, very gently. That way we do not lose control of the vehicle. And once you get to a nice spot on your nav ball, you can hit circle or B to turn SAS off, and then hit it again immediately to lock that position. Now we stage again. Now we want to switch to the map by hitting both our shoulder buttons. Let's turn the engine off for now and check our altitude. So it's almost out of the atmosphere. Let's push it beyond 70,000 meters to about 80. Now we'll escape the atmosphere. And if you check your science, it should say that you are in the upper atmosphere now. But we're not going to take that just yet either. We want to turn the vessel completely sideways on the 90-degree plane. Lock that position, and we're going to wait just a little bit until we reach the apoapsis, or a little before. That way we can start to burn sideways and try to circularize and make orbit, which we won't do just yet, but we will after this launch. Now once we hit 70,000, we can start collecting the science from space, as we will have escaped the atmosphere at that point. Getting close, we'll go on ahead and highlight one of them to have ready. And 70,000. We'll start collecting the science while boosting sideways. And by the time we're done getting the science, we should be out of fuel and ready to stage for return re-entry. And again, we cannot EVA just yet in space, but we need to now turn the vessel upward a little bit and stage, and then face towards the retro mark and set this to surface for entry burn. And it's good to adjust your angle or your rotation. Sometimes not entirely necessary, but it usually can be in most cases. And we'll keep an eye on our ablator, or we can just open it here. But for now, let's check our accomplishments. We escaped the atmosphere, completing that contract, launched our first vessel, completing that contract, and broke many records, collecting lots of money and science. As you can see now, all the money from those contracts and records, we have quite a bit to spend on our next vessel. So now we wait until we start to dip back down into the atmosphere. But right now, as you can see, it did move our orbital line a decent bit, almost halfway circularized. But we can fast forward by opening our radial menu and then enabling time warp mode, which you can see up here. And by using the shoulder buttons, you can control the speed at which you're warping through time. Now it's very good to make sure that your vessel is highlighted so you can keep track of its altitude while you're doing this. So once it hits 70,000, you need to turn back to retrograde for re-entry. which we will do now. And it will automatically stop your time warp because you are starting to enter the atmosphere. You hit circle to close your time warp so you can gain control of the vessel and then aim it retrograde. And here soon we will start to see the ablator. Its numeric value is starting to rise now at 0.01. That means we are starting to heat up a little bit. Now, after you get enough atmospheric force, you can disable SAS and just let it do its own thing. In fact, you can even begin to time warp again if you want. But once you get down to a certain altitude, say 25,000, 20,000, you'll want to stop time warping, or at least a little. And once your burn is over, and these are safe to deploy, you'll activate your drogues to slow down at a higher altitude. They will not fully deploy until whatever you have them set to. For me, 2500. But once they do, then you will activate these, or you can, or this, or you can activate it sooner. It's entirely dependent upon your rate of descent, angle of descent, your altitude, where the ground is, which is a bit hard to see where it's dark, but I will time warp a little until we're closer to the ground. Those will open. I'll disable time warp, and then I will deploy the top chute, which will fully open at 1,000 meters. It's good for landing in the ocean. If you're landing on land, you may want to adjust those. As over there, that is not 0,000 meters. It's not even 1,000 meters. It is likely 3,000. So you would smash into the ground before these even fully deploy. But we're not. We're hitting water, so we're fine. So now we'll just time warp, and you can hit square or X to stop the time warp completely down to -1 right before you hit the water, just to be safe. Say 100 meters away and poop. Disable the time warp, and I'll just let it land on its own now. And once we land in the water, we can exit the pod to gather our science and gather new science from where we landed. So we landed safely. We will EVA. This is another way to EVA. Let's turn our light on so we can look pretty while we do it. Let's take our data from space. And we will take our crew report from space and all the rest of the data so that we can do another crew report. And we'll also take an EVA report while we're out here from the shores. Get back in, and then grab our new science. And since we aren't getting any more new science after this, we can just leave those in those modules and recover the vessel. And then we'll see how much science we got from that, and try to unlock more tech and make orbit around Kerbin. But to do so, we may need more than 30 parts on our vessel, but we'll find out. Even take more than 5 parts to make orbit, as long as you have the right parts. As you can see, there's all the science that we just gathered. We are now up to 98. It's a decent chunk to start out with. So let's go spend those science points. Now, we can get the Science Junior module for loads of science, very useful, leaving us 53 points to spend, which we may want to invest in the radial decoupler. That way we can add more boosters. So let's go ahead and get that. And now we still have 35. We can get larger tanks. That way we use less parts, as well as larger solid fuel boosters for more power, and a longer first launch stage, as well as a new engine. But honestly, I never use this engine, ever. So that's all the science that we can spend for now. So let's leave. Do we have enough to upgrade this? We do, and it will cost a lot. However, these vessels are still fairly cheap. As long as we have at least 20,000, we can do some things. But we did complete our contracts. It's time to get some new ones. In this series, I'll be sticking to the Kerbin World's First Record Keeping Society missions mostly. So we'll collect our last one from the initial 4 starting contracts, which is making orbit around Kerbin. Now it's time to try to build a 30-part vessel to do that. If not, we'll have to upgrade this BAB. But we do have some nice new parts to do this with. And since we already have all the science that we need from being near Kerbin in space, you don't have to keep all the science on your pod, and you can reduce your part count as well as your weight if you want to, but I'm not going to. For now, I'm just getting rid of the rocket. And then I'm going to add the new Science Junior module. And before we make this rocket, I'm going to take all this new science and go back through the launch pads again to try to squeeze a little more science out of these before we make our second rocket. Now there's something else to learn here about doing science. In this case, repeating science. You can only repeat certain kinds of science and only so much. Now, last time we were here, we only had the mystery goo. This time, it will give us much less science, but we're still going to take it. However, we did not have any of the rest of these, so we're going to grab these. As well as the new Science Junior, which boasts a considerable amount of science compared to other sciences and all the different biomes. And if we try to get a crew report, where we already did the crew report once, we cannot do it again. And the same thing goes for trying to get an EVA report. But we still got science. It was still worth it. Didn't cost a penny. Now we'll just do this 2 more times at the other launch pads, and then we'll make our second rocket. And we're trying to keep this in under an hour per episode until we get to the larger missions, but for now, I think we'll be fine. So we just gained 14 science, we're up to 29. We're not going to spend it yet. We'll go to the launch pad and take the autosave ship, the one that we just used, hold X or A, and go to Boomerang, and do the science there, and then we'll do the same thing at the Kerbal Space Center's launch pad as well. So once again, except this time we did have the thermometer last time, so we won't get any science for it, but we can still squeeze some out of the mystery goo and the rest, as well as the barometric pressure reader. And that's it for this, so let's recover it. to the regular launch pad, so we will not have to hold X. We can just push it, or A, on the Xbox. Just for the record, I am playing on a PS4 Pro. And once we're done here, we'll get to the second rocket, with plenty of time to try to make orbit, should it fail the first time. So let's get our science. I don't think there's any more science we can get, except for a little bit of this mystery goo. Not much. So we'll recover, and then go spend these science points to try to unlock more stuff for this second rocket. Okay, so now we're up to 49. Let's see what we can do with that. Just what we need. The Terra engine is exactly what we really kinda need right now to try to make orbit. So, judging by the rest of the tech that we can get, I think we're gonna take that. And now, we'll do a quick save. We have $283,000 now, so let's upgrade our VAB and go in there and make our second rocket and try to make orbit. It'll be a very similar design to our last rocket, except now we can have side stages, and we can use up to 255 parts. We will keep what we have from all the sciencing and just add on to it now. So, the engine we're going to be using for our top stage to make orbit is the Terra. As you can see, in a vacuum, which is space, it can push 6 tons at 60 kilonewtons. So, let's add some fuel. And make sure not to make it too large. That way we can optimize its thrust and fuel efficiency. There. 5 tons should do, and that'll be our top stage for making orbit and returning to Kerbin. Now, let's make sure those stages are correct, and then we'll move on to the middle stage. Now, the middle stage, we're going to do a little bit more differently this time. Let's raise our rocket and grab the largest tanks that we can get. That way we're using less parts, even though we don't necessarily have to now. But we don't want it to be more than about 13 tons. That should do fine, and then we'll attach our swivel, which can push 16.7 tons. Let's go on ahead and add just a little bit more fuel, but we don't want to add too much, or else it won't move. However, it will be at a higher altitude, so it will be able to push more. It can push between 16 to 21 tons, depending on where you are, in altitude or in space. But for now, we'll leave it at 15.5 tons. And this is where we break out the radial decouplers. And we will stick these on the side of our vessel. And since we can use so many parts now, we will set it radially for 4. Much like the R7 rocket from Russia with the Korolev cross. We will then attach, let's say, 4 of these thumpers. It is better to use liquid fuel engines instead of solid rockets. And now we hit our snag. Since our launch pad is not upgraded, we still can't push more than 18 tons. So let's get rid of those. Now, how do we get it into space and make orbit and stay under 18 tons? Well, let's put a T12 decoupler down here, and then try attaching our thumper down here, and see if that meets the grade. Still too heavy. So what do we do? Let's reduce this by 2 tanks. Does that help? Not enough. So let's take 1 tank off of this stage. Still not going to be enough though, is it? Not quite. So let's get rid of these. And try to optimize our weight here by getting rid of this and putting a smaller one in its place. Now, when we reattach that, we are at 17 tons, which is good because we still need aerodynamics. And once again, we will set it to 3, which we can do this way, or by opening the radio menu and changing it from there. Now 3 should be enough to have a nice aerodynamic point between our mass and thrust. And we are still under 18. Now, because of that, let's try to add a little more to this second stage if we can. Hopefully we can, so we can get just a little more oomph. Okay. So let's take that. And try to add even more instead of that one. And see if that will do. Okay, so that is our limit. This smallest tank. Like I said before, I like to make it look a little more aesthetically pleasing. So, let's try to make it look a little more aesthetically pleasing. But really, that's just preference. I think that'll look nice. I do like that orange. You know what? Let's go with that. Alright, so now we have our second rocket. We will rename to R1A. Save. And now we have both in our files. We need to check our staging, make sure everything is in order. Save it again. Let's pull it down to the ground just a little bit. Make sure it's barely popping up off the ground. That way it loads nice and smooth. And we do have some batteries. Let's go on ahead and pop a couple in this thing. We'll stick it in this, I suppose. Now, we will go to move, and move those into the science module. That way, they do not burn up. And we won't need them in our capsule for re-entry, so that'll work. Now we have our second rocket. Everything is fine. We are not generating power, but that is okay. Our rocket's engines will take care of that for us, which you can see in the descriptions of the rocket whenever you expand the menu. Or, well, I guess only the swivel does. The Terrier will not. That's a shame. But anywho, it'll work. Now there are no other parts that we need to add, I do not think. So, let's save and launch the rocket. And we will see if it will be enough to make orbit. If not, we'll get a little more science and maybe upgrade the launch pad if we can to make a larger rocket to make orbit. Let's launch. once again, the solid rocket boosters can't really control your angle unless you have verniers or RCS, so we're just going to let it burn and burn, and once it's out of fuel, then we hit our second stage with the swivel engine. We can then gimbal and turn our rocket, which begins now. And we'll try to slowly turn it so we don't lose control, and we are losing control, so we'll turn it off, turn it back on. Okay, this is bad. Okay, there we go. Still probably not going to make orbit because of that mistake, but we'll keep going. And we're close to 500 meters. We need to be at a 90-degree angle, but we can't lose control of the vehicle again. So we'll slowly ease it over until it's at 90 degrees, and lock our position. And check our map to see where our apoapsis is. Once it hits about 70,000, we will turn sideways. And it's close, let's go ahead and turn sideways. And try to lock our position there. And get rid of that stage after turning our thruster down. And it is not a good idea to use the Terra engine until you reach a vacuum, or at least close to a vacuum, or it won't increase your speed, or at least not much. However, it is very fuel efficient, and as long as we have enough to make at least 2200 meters per second completely sideways, we can make orbit. And the closer we get to this, we need to go ahead and activate the engine so we don't reach our apoapsis too soon. But we don't want to waste the fuel if we're not in space either. So you have to be very careful about your line. Now last time we were not able to get atmospheric science, so let's get that upper atmosphere science before we reach space at 70,000 meters as quickly as possible. And once we hit space, we will only have one other option, and that is our Science Junior. Now we can take a massive load of science from that, and let's check our line. We're still doing good. We'll go ahead and keep burning sideways for now, maybe a little under. And the apoapsis is still being pushed ahead of us, that's good. Once it hits about 100,000, it doesn't have to be, it can be 70,000 even. But once it hits about 100,000, I'm going to back off. Even now, we could stop and then wait until we are right on top of the apoapsis to finish circularization, but I like 100,000. Not sure why, I just do. Seems like a nice, good, stable number to make orbit. And as you can see, our periapsis is already poking out. That's part of the reason why I like 100,000. But let's go on ahead and time warp over to the apoapsis. And once we're there, we'll point prograde again. Hit square or X on the Xbox to time warp down to 0, circle or B to close it. Line back up to the prograde while keeping an eye on your fuel and your battery. There, we have made orbit by barely even thrusting just a little bit more to circularize. Now, we are in orbit. Let's go on ahead and quick save and go back to the Space Center, because there are new contracts that we need to grab before we miss them, including returning from orbit, so we can score some extra cash and a little bit of extra science and reputation. Once we get back to the Space Center, you'll notice we have quite a bit more money and a little bit more science before even returning with the science. And we have finished orbiting Kerbin contract. So now let's go back to the administration building and collect our new contract, which is return to Kerbin from orbit. And we'll go to the tracking station and get back in our vessel and come back home. And there we are. So I'm gonna time warp until it's on the day side so it'll look better for the stream, so you can actually see what's going on. And now we have some sunlight. We're on the Apple axis side. Hit X or A and return to flying the vessel. And as soon as we get back, we will point retrograde. And now that we've made orbit around Kerbin, whichever Kerbal we took with us should be leveled. Now the only bad thing about this is I cannot EVA in space to collect the science. So I have to do something about that, don't I? Or else we're going to lose that. So let's go back to the Space Center. And as mentioned before, in order to EVA in space, we have to upgrade our administration building. So let's go ahead and do that. We should have enough money. And we won't have to worry about losing that money because we are going to get it back. Or not our administration building, but the astronaut complex. Plenty of money. Let's go ahead and do it. Now we can EVA in space and plant flags. And just in case there is a contract for it, let's see if there is one for planting a flag. There is not? Okay. So now let's get back to our ship. And now we can EVA in space and do so much more with our science. So getting back in the vessel and waiting for it to load. Once we get back, we will go EVA, collect our science, and get our first EVA report from space, as well as our first spacewalk. So let's EVA and collect our science and do an EVA report. And since we're using Jeb now, I want to go on ahead and make sure to adjust the light on his astronaut suit as well. And we can take the crew report, opening it up to where we can now get a crew report in space. If we didn't last time, we did, so we can't get any science from that. However, we did just do our first spacewalk. Now, for our new contract, we need to return to Kerbin from orbit. In order to do this, we must point retrograde. And Jebediah did not level up enough, so we're going to have to do it manually. We will switch to surface and begin burning retrograde. Since we have so much fuel, we're just going to go ahead and use it all up. Watching our line, as you can see, we might land in the desert, or in the mountain range, in the middle of the desert. But we'll see. But for now, let's get rid of that stage, and make sure to stay retrograde. We'll time warp until it kicks off at 70,000. Turn that off and go back to retro. And then once we start to feel the burn on our ablator, we'll make sure that we're nice and centered on the retro mark, and then turn SAS off and let it center itself until we actually get the ability to lock onto retro. So anytime now, we are starting to feel the burn now, so let's turn SAS off. That way it can just somewhat automatically lock retrograde itself due to the atmospheric force. And once we get out of the upper atmosphere, we can collect a little bit more science. Now, since I forgot to EVA and collect the upper atmosphere science, EVA, we'll have to do that next time, as well as collecting the science from these to collect science from the upper or lower atmosphere as well while we're dropping. However, there is still more that we can do. Once we leave the upper atmosphere and deploy our parachutes, we'll get more science. Here momentarily. And the burn should be ending here in just a few seconds. Now we're just pushing through the sound barrier. We'll activate our drogue chutes. We should be out of the upper atmosphere now, into the lower atmosphere, flying a Kerbin. We'll take that science and wait until all of our parachutes deploy. We'll go ahead and deploy that one. We'll fast forward a little bit here through time until both of those deploy. They should automatically adjust when they deploy. That's why I never change them. There goes the top stage exploding. Okay, now that those are fully deployed, it is safe to EVA. We'll hop out, collect the science from here, and since we are not a scientist, we cannot use them unless we are in the pod. So after we get our science and our EVA report, as well as admiring those beautiful lights on the suit, thank you breaking ground, we will get back in. And we will now get a crew report from this desert and collect our science from the barometer as well as the thermometer. And then it's only a matter of simply cruising to the ground. Jebediah is ecstatic to be landing in the desert, but then again, when isn't he? So once we get close to the ground, we will deactivate time warp by hitting square or X, let it land. Once again keeping the heat shield as a bit of a buffer for safety concerns. And now that we've landed, let's EVA. Take the science, as well as the crew report. And while we're at it, we'll get our EVA report. But we already have it, so we'll get nothing from that. Now let's put it all back in here and exit again. Let go, run over here a little bit, and put a flag down now that we can do that. I'm not sure if there's ever a contract for planting a flag on Kerbin, but I'm going to name this 1 for our first orbital return and flag placement, and check this out. Now we have a little bit of money in rep from placing a flag. Maybe could have gotten more if there were a contract for it, but I'm not sure if there is. We completed that contract. We are done here. Let's get back in our pod and finish collecting the last of the science that we need from the desert now that we've landed on the desert. Different from flying over it. That's all that we can do. So let's recover our vessel. We are now almost 5 minutes over the initial episode time length that I was hoping for, but that's not bad. We completed the missions. We have a very big one coming up next, I believe. It is time to fly by the moon, which we will do in the next episode. But for now, let's wrap this up. All added, we are at 139. Quite a bit of money, still need more, but let's go spend that science. For now, we need to get to the moon. So, in order to do so, we're going to need some new parts. We're going to need some solar panels, so we'll grab that. I'm not sure if we can afford much more. However, we can now afford what's called struts. One of the most important parts in the game. It helps stabilize your vessel. We will need these, so let's grab them. Now that also allows us to auto-strut all of our parts, which we will cover in the next episode as well. That is all we can do in the tech tree, and there is not much else that we can spend to, or not much else we can upgrade right now, or that we can afford to upgrade, but we can afford to upgrade our launch pads. So now we can launch up to 140 tons into space instead of 18. That will be very useful in the next episode. But for now, let's check our contract and see where we are heading in our next episode, and indeed, we are flying by the moon and coming back. Looking forward to that episode, because this will help a lot of people, I believe. A lot of people seem to get stuck whenever it comes to going to the moon. So that will be a big episode. Let's make a main save, 101, which we will use at the end of every episode, quick saves during the episode. That is it for our first episode. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode soon. Goodbye.